Yo, what's up guys, Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So Teofimo Lopez outboxes, outpoints Arnold Barboza Jr. to retain his WBO super lightweight title. This was the best I've seen from Teofimo for quite some time. He basically did what I felt that Barboza should do to him. Because, I've always seen Teo as a guy who kind of struggles on the front foot when he's forced to chase a fight. And that's what I was speculating that Barboza should try to enforce on Teo. But that's not what happened here. Teofimo was the guy who was able to make Arnold Barboza lead for the most part. And Teo's sort of hand speed, his foot speed, his upper body movement, and his better reaction times and speed all around proved too much for Arnold. When Arnold would lead, he would get caught with the overhand right, and it was primarily the overhand right from Teo that was scoring for him in this bout. He was more active with his jab as well, which I kind of like to see from Teo. I've always felt that Teofimo doesn't use his jab enough, and he was still guilty of that in this fight in certain stages. But when he wasn't doing much, he was just being a bit more active with his lead hand, firing the jab from his waist, both to body and head, changing levels with it. Again, that was effective in sometimes drawing the lead of Barboza, and Teo would then counter with his own overhand right. And primarily, it was Teofimo baiting in Barboza and countering throughout most of this fight. There were times when Teo would land a 2-3 punch combination, really quick punches, but for the most part it was pretty methodical from Teofimo Lopez, and you could tell early on that the speed disadvantage for Barboza was really troubling him. I don't think he knew whether he was coming or going, quite frankly. The moments he tried to apply a bit of pressure, he was kind of stopped in his tracks with a big right. And when he was trying to box with Teo, he was just kind of outsped. One thing in this fight where I felt Barboza did have success, and I don't think his corner mentioned this at all, but when he exchanged, so when Teo would open up, Barboza did have success when he would throw after Teo had thrown his combination. So he would basically punch at the end of Teo's combinations when Teo did throw combos. And when he did that, he was able to catch Teo with some cuffing left hooks and some right hands of his own. But that was primarily his best success in this fight, was when he was either throwing at the end of Teo's combinations, or sometimes when he would even exchange with Teo. Teo would usually outwork him, but Barboza did land some good right hands when he exchanged with Teo. In fact, in round 6, I think it was, he slightly buckled the knees of Teo. Wasn't badly hurt or anything like that, but it was a really good shot. In fact, Barboza should have really followed on more than he actually did. I don't think Teo was hurt, but he felt the shot still. But yeah, first 6 rounds in particular, apart from that big shot, I felt Teo looked very good. Second half, I felt he drifted off a little bit. A lot of the rounds in the second half, in my opinion, were tit for tat with Teo winning most of them. But his output dropped a little bit. I don't think he looked quite as dynamic in the second half. He was still making Barboza miss with his upper body movement and foot speed. And he was still countering, but I think the intensity from Teo, or the dynamism from Teo, wasn't quite as impressive in the second half. But having said that, he was still winning the majority of rounds, I would say. I would sort of score this in 9 rounds to 3 in favour of Teo. And yeah, he just successfully drew the lead of Barboza throughout this fight. He was countering Barboza's jab quite effectively. Barboza did try to change the jab up from body to head, but it wasn't really working for him. And, he just didn't have the speed to box with Teo, like I said. He couldn't pressure Teo, and he never really had the power to, get himself back in the fight. Yeah, Teo was just a step ahead throughout. And it was a relatively disciplined performance by Teofimo Lopez. Best I've seen him look since Josh Taylor. But again, this is what really winds me up about Teofimo Lopez, man. His fights are so hard to predict. Because one minute he looks distinctly average, beatable, You know, he lost to Cambosos for Christ's sake. You know, went life and death with Sandor Martin and Jermaine Ortiz. And yet he beats a better fighter than those guys in Barboza quite comfortably, very comfortably. You know, I find it very hard to pick Teo fights because we just don't know what version of Teo will show up. But this was a good version. And when he's at his best, he's a very talented fighter. Teo's one of those fighters I don't even like talking about Teofimo because he's one of those fighters that's really polarizing. He has fanboys and he has a lot of like haters. There's no real in-between with Teo. There's some people who believe like every single one of Teo's fights are fake. You know, like the Black Pill crowd. And there are some who just worship this guy to the nth degree. And like, it's really hard to have a sensible conversation surrounding Teofimo Lopez. But my thoughts remain the same on him. He's a talented fighter, physically. You know, he's fast, he's explosive, he's got great reactions. Speed, not just in terms of hand speed, but foot speed, reaction time. He's got a hell of a lot of attributes physically, but technically there are still some things there that are open and could be improved. And obviously the question mark is still there mentally. But you know, he's an interesting fighter. We'll see whether he can build on it. And yeah, it is what it is. It wasn't a great fight. It was quite routine for Teofimo, but he won the fight. He won it clearly, and you know this is going to go down, in my opinion, as his third best win on paper, anyway. Yeah, decent performance. I got this one wrong because I went for the underdog. I went for Barboza. I thought Barboza would frustrate Teo, but that's not what happened. Teo frustrated Barboza. But anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.